Eleven Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And hey, spring is almost done here. Spring football.
I thought we were
going
going
to
to lead off with a spring has sprung variation for like the third or fourth episode in a row.
Well, I guess it doesn't really feel like that because it's been raining for about a week straight here in Columbus, Ohio. And I think tomorrow the high is like 40 degrees, which I personally love. I'm all about that, but I don't know that my sump pump does. So it's been an interesting spring. Some of the things that we were talking about last week were immediately refuted. We're going to get into that a little bit, which is always good.
Simultaneously refuted with the posting of the episode.
Right. So I love that because we record a couple days early before this post. We're usually more susceptible to getting scooped by time and space during the football season, but in the off season, we're like, usually it's not that big of a deal. And now I say something like, we really got to make sure that Chris Henry Jr., is protected and Ohio State stays in the competition for that. And in between me saying that and us publishing the Dubcast, he goes ahead and shuts down his recruitment and says, I'm Ohio State all the way, baby.
Well,
Johnny Getter's an idiot.
Not even in between. The funny part is, if you're part of the audience that watches this on YouTube, if you get it in your RSS feed or podcast or whatever, you're getting it at 2:00 anyway. The article publishes at 2:50 on 11 Warriors. If you just wait for that to go up, if you're hankering for your Dubcast,
waiting
roughly
with
an hour
breath
earlier, you can catch it at 2:00 on YouTube. Or it will publish through Transistor at the same time at 2:00 on Tuesdays.
I want to know who's sitting at their computer and just slamming F5 like on Tuesday.
There's at least one person. If the episode doesn't go up on Tuesdays, there's usually one person in the comment that is like, "Hey, I didn't get it at least for this day."
What the hell is your problem, George?
So there are some people waiting with bated breath.
Okay.
Anyway,
well, good. I love you. I love those people. Just understand that we're best friends now.
The point to what you were originally saying is we, hope ideally that between the Sunday night that we record this and the Tuesday afternoon that this publishes, that nothing major breaks.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, the last 2 weeks in a row, we've gotten a little bit snake bitten by that. We figured last week, April 1st, that's a terrible day to publish news. Surely nothing significant is going to happen on April 1st of all days, right? And then Chris Henry shuts down his recruitment and announces it at 2:00 p.m. Eastern at the very same time the episode with Johnny openly hoping that Ohio State can lock down Chris Henry Jr.
Fingers crossed.
You got your wish though.
I did. Thank you, Chris, for fulfilling that. And as a Bengals semi-supporter, that makes me happy that he's confirmed that he's going to Ohio State. Obviously, as an Ohio State fan, that makes me happy. He's an incredible wide receiver. But that's not all that happened.
Looks like that Oregon shoe deal that you were worried about didn't really come to pass.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how real that kind of stuff actually is. I know that's, everybody, I think, has a certain level of paranoia when it comes to, Nike and Phil Knight and all that, just because they're like, well, they'll just walk in swinging their big, bag of cash at people.
I saw a lot of jokes about Nike's stock price this week relative to Oregon's NIL potential.
Well, you know what? Maybe that was Chris Henry's fault. Maybe he's the guy who was like, no way, dude, I'm tanking this stock.
Blame Chris Henry. It had nothing to do with anything I did.
So he shut down his recruitment. He locked in with Ohio State. That's great. We loved it. That's good to hear. 5-star wide receiver. He's legit. Ohio State also got a commitment from Blaine Bradford, 5-star safety. I think out of Louisiana, is that correct? Which, at a Baton Rouge.
Number one safety in the class.
Yeah, number one safety in the class. One of the best in the country, top 50. I think might be 30th in the country. But yeah, out of Baton Rouge. I don't know if that's going to stick. I mean, you never know if it's going to stick. I assume, honestly at this point that any high school recruitment is up in the air until they're like actually playing. But that's a hell of a get.
There were a lot of people I saw on social media making that same open questioning too, and his I think his I don't know if it was mom or his dad, but one of his parents at least was like very out in front of it in terms of saying like we're not going to be tempted by LSU or anybody throwing any other like money at us. Like this is,
Why not though?
this is what we want to do.
Like, why not? I mean, look, if Ohio State, if I were a big time recruit from Baton Rouge, Louisiana,
Nobody's recruits have ever lied, or recruits' parents have ever
well,
lied to
right.
strangers on the internet about this stuff before.
But I'm just
have
saying,
they?
like, if I were a big time recruit, if I were a 5-star, he's actually 23rd in the class overall, which is pretty awesome. If I were a 5-star recruit from Louisiana or Georgia or whatever, and Ohio State rolls down and gives me like $1 million or $2 million, and then my hometown team gives me twice that, I'm gonna think about it. Like it's gonna be something I have to take into consideration. So that's what
Some of these people have higher moral standards than you, John.
clearly
When they make a commitment, they stick by it.
I guess so. Simeon Caldwell, also another recruit this past week, another safety, which is pretty awesome. So Tim Walton remains winning. That dude is killing it. Continues to be killing it.
That's a lot of safeties, though, right? Like these are all these are both 2026 guys. Am I correct?
Yeah,
did they not get another safety like early, like a few months ago?
I think honestly, they're probably of the opinion that you've got to take talent where you can get it. You know that Caleb Downs is leaving, right? Like after this season, he's gone. I don't know. I think that's in terms of the way their recruiting classes.
I mean, they got the number 2 safety in last year's class,
right? So I mean, I think they're probably good after this, but I'm not sweating. I think that's probably a decent
again, I mean, not to question Tim Walton's, pursuit or targeting or anything like this, but I'm just saying it's loading up on a position where it especially I feel like it's harder to for some reason I feel like it's harder to pivot guys between playing free safety and strong safety than it is between cornerback on one side of the field or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
No,
there's less flexibility if you're filling that. I guess what I'm saying is I would rather see a wealth of commitments at cornerback than at safety in terms of the concentration of the defensive back room.
Well, cornerback's interesting because they picked up a lot of dudes in the I think the 2025-24.
This is a very first world problem.
No, I know. That's right. Yeah. No, I mean, oh gosh, we have too many 5-stars. I think what they're looking at with safety is they know that Downs is gone. Hartford's probably going to be gone, right? So then the core of your guys are maybe McLean, who I think a lot of people have said is going to get a bunch of playing time this year. And then some other guys who aren't quite as highly rated as some of the dudes that they're bringing in. So I think that's probably part of it. And they did bring in, I mean, they had a pretty great cornerback class the past couple of years. So I think that's probably part of it. But I wouldn't think they would add to that. I think what those two guys, I think they're probably set, provided they both stay, in the class. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I certainly wouldn't, hate having both those guys suit up for Ohio State. Ohio State also added a 3-star linebacker out of Ohio, which
yay.
CJ Santa, from Lewis Center. Okay. So, look, I think you have to have those kind of players. I think it's important to keep those connections strong. I don't know. I'm definitely like poo-pooing this guy based on the fact that he just has 3 stars, which I don't think is fair. And also he has 4 stars depending on the recruiting service. So I think he'll be definitely I think he'll be a benefit to the team, but it also doesn't suck to have a guy, from just north of Columbus coming in and helping out. So I think that is important to have that aspect and to keep those relationships strong. So I'm happy about that. He also had a bunch of, I don't know, I was looking at his offer list. He had a bunch of, Big Ten offers, Miami, I assume that's Miami, Florida, not Miami of Ohio, but Michigan State, Minnesota, Purdue, Rutgers. So
I don't necessarily think in-state relationships would have deteriorated had they not brought Mr. Santa into
Maybe not
the
him
fold.
specifically, but I do think in general you want to have Ohio guys on your team. I don't know. I still feel like that's important, and maybe that's just me showing my ass and as a 40-year-old man. But like, yeah, I kind of like that. I like to see Ohio players on Ohio State.
Well,
That's
the
important to
number
me.
one receiver in next year's class, or I think he's top 5 at least the position if he's not number 1. But the guy's right down the street in Dayton, and he committed during the season last year. So
There you go.
they're obviously things are still going good enough in state that they're able to pull like secure commitments like that from that far out. And I mean, is Chris Henry not an in-state guy too, or
No,
has
Chris. I don't think so. Chris Henry, I think, is, I want to say Florida.
okay? So their family didn't stick around Cincinnati then.
No, I don't believe
Okay.
so.
All right,
I don't know if
fair
he's
enough.
Florida, but I'm pretty sure he's not Ohio.
Okay.
So
Fair enough. The new offensive line coach has already secured a couple commitments from in-state offensive linemen too. So
yeah.
that was one of the big criticisms we had of Fry, is that outside of the twins that they got, he had really been letting a lot of these solid in-state prospects get away from him on the recruiting trail, and they were having to lean more on the portal. And then Bowen, right, comes in,
Tyler Bowen,
and
yep.
yeah, and he comes in and he's immediately hitting on. I mean, we're still waiting for the big glare. We haven't gotten our David Sanders Jr. level guy yet. We're still waiting on that one. But the guy literally just got here, and we're already getting solid in-state recruits again for linemen. That's got to make you feel good at least.
First of all, real quick, Chris Henry is in California, not Florida.
Okay.
I just want to correct myself. I can't remember this guy's name, but do you remember this offensive line recruit? This is during the Trussell era, who was, I mean, everybody was losing their minds over this kid. And he ended up not amounting to much of anything in college, never mind the NFL. And I just remember very specifically this picture of Jim Tressel in this kid's house, and Tressel's taking his shoes off to go in the house, which is like, some people, have that as proper etiquette and whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's a very odd picture because it feels very like almost emasculating somehow the way it's shot.
Was this the same guy that Urban Meyer told? He said, I had a dream, and in the dream, God told me that you were going to go to Florida.
Yeah. I think it might have been that guy. And he ended up, I think, at Miami.
He went to Florida after Urban fed him that line of BS. So it couldn't have been the same guy.
I saw it in a dream. Yeah, I think it's a different guy then.
But I wouldn't be.
But I remember that story too, which is ridiculous.
If you know who we're talking about, listeners, feel free to tell us in the comments.
Yeah. Anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because I do think that you can only invest so much emotional energy into these recruitment things, and now even more so with
and
NIL.
You can't take your shoes off when you're visiting their homes. That's something that Jim Harbaugh was very good at doing.
That's right.
So I will screw up your hardwood floors with my cleats.
That's right. I'm just going to scuff them as much as possible.
That's a power move.
That's right. So that
removing your shoes is not a sign of respectfulness like it is in places like Japan. It is a sign of weakness.
You know what bothers me though? Okay, if you're going to remove your shoes, that's great. I think the hosts, if they're going to demand that of you, should offer you some slippers. That's how I feel about it. If you're going to ask that your guests, and I'll say it, someone emasculate themselves in taking off their shoes and have to tiptoe around your Hummel figurines.
It's emasculating to take your shoes off
a little bit for both men and women. I think it's kind of a power move, honestly, on the part of the host. I think it's a little bit of a power move, and I think
take off your shoes.
That's no seriously. Let me watch you do it. And now you got to put them by this tea cozy. No, I think it is a little bit of a power play by the host, and I think if you're going to require your guests to do that, you should provide slippers for them to wear instead. That's all I'm saying, because that's what they would do in a Japanese house, and that's what they do in like Japanese schools and stuff, and that I find that very respectful and polite, and I'm just saying.
I knew as soon as
if this comes up at all.
I
life.
knew as soon as I drew the comparison to Japan, it was going to get you worked up.
I'm just, every time I walk into a house in America and they ask me to take, look, I've been looking at houses recently. All I'm saying is they keep wanting me to take my shoes off. And I just want to be like, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just leave. Maybe I'll just live in a box the rest of my life. All right. So Tim Walton stays winning. All right. So recruiting, spring football is about finished. We got a week left. Spring game is this Saturday. I won't be able to be there, unfortunately, but I hope you will because the weather's supposed to be fantastic. And it's $8 to get in. So support what is actually a spring game.
You don't know how many of these we're going to have left.
Yeah, I know.
They already got some pushback from trying to make it the spring showcase. And they're like, no, okay, fine. We'll do.
Right. Good.
We'll do
the people demanded it, and they got it, and they deserve it. Some spring,
but at the same time, the brass was like, all right, they were too resistant to the change this time.
Yeah, right. So I'm sure they'll try.
We'll see how much more we can get away with as the years roll on before we finally broken their will and we can just do away with it altogether.
No, you're right. That is exactly what's going to happen. They will try to minimize it and get rid of it before they finally, cut the cord altogether.
For your only option is to pay $50 to go to practice.
For God's sake. So anyway, we got a week left. Initial reactions, there was the Student Appreciation Day. We haven't seen a lot of practice, comparatively to maybe, like when they're really trying to open it up in past years. But some interesting observations for our beat guys. Lincoln Kienholz was apparently performing the best out of all of the quarterbacks, including Julian Sayin and Tavian St. Clair.
I refuse to believe it.
I can believe it a little bit, but I think the bar isn't super high. I think that's pretty much where we're at right now. We don't have virtually any experience.
If it was measurably close between St. Clair and Kienholz, it was 100% St. Clair was the better of the two.
Do you think we had this? You made that point at the beginning of last season, which is okay. Well, we got to start Julian saying if there's any trepidation that Will Howard is the guy that we got to go with Sayin. So I assume that means you kind of feel the same way with like Lincoln Kienholz and Julian Sayin versus Tavian St. Clair.
I would much rather have Sayin or St. Clair than Kienholz. Yeah.
I'm not going to get in an argument with you about his last name. But
until he earns the starting job, he is Kienholz.
Fine. Here's the question I actually want to ask you, though, because this we talked about this in the pre-show.
By the way, very, very strong stance comparing Kienholz to Howard relative to what I was saying.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But here's my question. So let's say it's not between Lincoln and the other two dudes. Let's say it's between Tavian St. Clair and Julian Sayin. Who would you pick and why?
I would be comfortable with either of them.
Okay.
Whoever is gonna make the offense and Day feel the most and Heartline feel the most comfortable with running the show.
Sure.
I want them to go with them. And that was the same way I felt about it last year. Last year we had a better idea of who Will Howard was. I don't think any of us outside of the team expected the kind of metamorphosis that Howard ultimately underwent.
But he was a known quantity, right? Like that's important.
Right. These two, it's a different situation this year because these two are still very much in the early stages of their careers where a lot of molding can still take place. Sayin has been around the program for a year more. He's actually been on the field in the uniform, granted only in a relief capacity, and hasn't necessarily, dazzled during that time, but has still had that little measure of game experience and comfort more than what St. Clair has. I feel like that would make at least somewhat of a difference if you were to declare the guy that hasn't played a down of college football the starter, and then you throw him. It's literally it's got a thrown to the wolves situation, putting that guy in for the first game against Texas.
Sure.
Whoever ends up, even if it ends up being Kienholz, Like, I mean, the guy got thrown into the fire against Missouri and did not respond to it well. Now, he didn't expect to be the starter for that game. I think if you're operating in front of or in relief of a player in front of you that you know is fairly injury prone, you should be more prepared to play in that situation than perhaps Kienholz was. But that also speaks to the fact that it was a bowl game. There were a lot of absences. I mean, I'm sure that there were probably, at least based on what Carson Hinsman said in that podcast that he did, it seems like that the entire team wasn't taking that game as seriously as they
Well,
would have
no,
perhaps taken a
clearly
CFP
not.
game.
Yeah, I
So
mean, and they had guys out who were going to the draft and all that stuff. Like,
yeah, so
no,
you could
nobody was
say
taking
that
that game
so
seriously.
you could say that he does deserve a mulligan a little bit in that respect. But to get back to St. Clair versus Sayin, I there's too much that we don't know in terms of where these guys are at in their development and how the team feels comfortable with the two of them. I think you figuratively have to lean Sayin just because he's been here a little bit longer. But whichever guy is making a more positive impression on the coaches and their teammates is the guy that should end up being it. And
Yeah.
I'm not in a camp where I'm not one. I mean, granted, I again was the guy that figuratively wanted Sayin to be the starter over Howard last year when we were at this stage a year ago because we didn't really know where either of them were going to be. And Howard
Yeah.
wasn't a guy that could throw the ball further than 15 yards down the field. But at the end of the day, we just want what's best for the team.
Right.
So whoever's making, so that's why I didn't throw a fit. But at the same time, there's people that are saying like Sayin is the biggest arm talent Ohio State has seen since,
right.
You know,
yeah, like Troy Smith or
yeah,
Justin
exactly.
Fields or,
so I'm sure there's a lot of people that want to see that guy the starter. I'm not going to throw a fit if it doesn't end up being him.
Yeah.
Whoever's most comfortable, Days are in the benefit of the doubt at this point that he knows who he's working with and who he's going to make improvements to.
And the thing is, and going back to Will Howard for a second, one of the things that people were saying about him after observing practices, even in August, was that this guy is like not ready. Like he's had some bad practices. He started out fall camp last season with a string of really bad performances, and then a light switch flipped and he figured it out and he got a lot better. And I think a large part of that is because you've got a guy who is a really, really good quarterbacks coach in Ryan Day, who can really just identify and improve and, make these guys into viable starters. And so, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm with you. Like it's whoever ends up benefiting the team the most. I think any of these guys, you're essentially throwing to the Wolves the first game of the season, right? Like I don't think any of these dudes are going to come out and they're going to look like Heisman contenders week one. So whoever ends up being, whether it's Kienholz or Sayin or Tavian St. Clair, whoever.
I expect all of them to outplay Archie Manning in the first game.
Well, that's the other thing. Like I personally, wouldn't that be funny as hell if like, maybe not Julian Sayin because, he was such a highly regarded prospect when he went to Alabama, but like if freaking Lincoln Kienholz out of, Nowheresville, South Dakota outplays Archie Manning in the first game of the season, I would die laughing. Like it would be the funniest damn thing that's happened for Ohio State football since the last funniest thing.
The one listener we have in South Dakota right now is writing a very angry email to ask us anything.
Look, hey, that dude is considered to be one of the greatest multi-sport athletes in that state's history. And considering there's been at least a couple dozen athletes in that state's history, that's a big deal. Just twisting the knife, South Dakota.
North Dakota is the one you want to go after.
Is he? Maybe is he from South Dakota or North Dakota?
He's from South Dakota.
Okay, good. Okay.
No athlete has ever come from North Dakota.
That's right. The Bison, don't they? Yeah, they got the really good.
It's one of those states where there's more sheep than people.
Yeah, fair enough. So anyway, I think the spring game is going to be really interesting, and yeah, keep an eye on that quarterback competition.
And just the last thing to the point
go ahead,
made about what the coaches were saying about Howard having a bad stretch of late practices.
Mm-hmm.
The feedback that we got from our beat this week was prefaced by the notion that we were skeptical of what we saw with our own eyes from Howard in the early practices last year relative to how good he was going to be for the team going into the season.
Mm-hmm.
So there was skepticism around Howard that ended up obviously not mattering once the ball actually got rolling for this team.
Right.
So it's very, and they preface that in terms of what happened with Sayin in this late stage of spring ball. So even if he doesn't end up impressing during the spring game, and even if there's still some early turbulence in fall camp heading into the season, that could still change, depending on how comfortable they get with as they get deeper into the schedule. I will say I think we should probably set some early expectations right now as I'm talking about it out loud, in terms of, like, we really are going to be dealing with a very inexperienced player against one of the teams that is highly favored to win the national championship next season, other
Yeah.
than Ohio State. So
Yep.
it's, it is important to take a long, and I think that the loss to Oregon might help, like, stem the blow of them potentially losing to Texas a little bit, just because it's proven that that loss, even if it's in October versus this being the very first game of the season, it's not the end all be all. The Virginia Tech loss in 2014 wasn't the end all be all either. There's still going to be a contingent of fans that freak out, just because that's what happens every time this team loses any game, regardless of the opponent.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that given the difference in quarterback experience and the fact that that is going to be probably it's going to be the first game as a starter for any of those three guys, it's important to set expectations right now in terms of, they might not pull it out, but that doesn't mean that they can't still defend their title.
And I don't see CJ Stroud I don't see a CJ Stroud like performance where it's like, oh, you're going to throw for 400 yards, and that doesn't seem realistic to me, even with Jeremiah Smith.
And rush for a 50-yard touchdown.
Right, exactly. So we'll get into a few other things, but let's do Ask Us Anything. And before we do that, I want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store, 11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Check it out, drygoods.11warriors.com. Including we got some pretty sweet shirts coming up. Just keep an eye on it. If you like, let me put it this way: if you like the 85 yards for the Heart of the South shirt, I'm just saying, just keep an eye on it. I'm Julian Sayin. No, I'm kidding. It's not about Julian Sayin. So let's do Ask Us Anything. You can ask us anything by sending us questions to dubcast@11warriors.com. This is first one's from our good friend Alvin, who wants to know, how long are we allowed to gloat our natty? Until the next season starts, or until another team wins it all? So what's the etiquette here? How long can you reasonably go, we're number one? We're the national
I would say until another team wins it.
Okay. So how would you, because for me, I feel like it's a little gauche, a little in ill taste and bad taste to do it once the season started.
I mean, I was always raised to win with dignity and lose with grace. So it's more of, when another person is talking up their team or whatever, then you just kind of smile and nod. And then if they get a little too pompous, that's when you remind them who's boss. You don't have to be the people thrown it in their face. Obviously, it's a different situation if you're talking to a Michigan fan, especially because Ohio State are the ones that dethroned Michigan, even with them having lost to Michigan in the most recent game. They were dethroned as champions by Ohio State.
That's true. It's
a very important point to make when you're conversing with a Michigan fan. But for any other fans in the college football space, let them talk themselves and butter themselves up and be like, okay, that's fine. Just enjoy the fact that you are a supporter of a national championship winning team, because there's a lot of people that don't even get to experience that kind of joy during their lifetime as a fan.
That's true.
And I'm grateful enough to have tasted it 3 times.
I mean, the thing about it for me is that a lot of it's contextual, because it does kind of depend on how your team is doing during the season. because
I don't agree
especially
with that.
well, the reason why I say that is because at the beginning of the season when Michigan was looking really bad, and they improved as the season went on, but when Michigan was looking really bad at the beginning of the season, like, hey, at least we're still national champs. And I'm like,
We were always very respectful of Michigan, even when they
Right.
were at their worst. We never talked down to them
Right.
at any point.
But my point is that it seems a little like reflexively like, yeah, but we're still cool kind of thing. And it's like, oh, not really, because you're just getting your asses handed to you by actual good teams. And like that sounds a little kind of pathetic when you have to hang on to it, to justify, your current crappiness. So if Ohio State comes out and they they lose 6 or 7 games next season, which I don't see happening, but let's say that happened, and they're like, but we're still national champs. It's like, well, nobody cares because it's November. So maybe
it is embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to maintain a level of success, but if they come out and they're still in it to win it, you're like, yeah, and defending national champs, let's see what's up. Like that to me is when you can still crow about it. So I don't know.
I think you could still crow about it when if your team is having a terrible title defense season, but you can't lead. Like it's too easy to counter with, oh, you're really doing that defense is going
That's
real
what
well
I'm saying.
for you, huh?
Exactly.
But it's less worse if you're letting the other people butter their own team up, and then you can say, well, at least we're defending champions, and then it's like, oh, well, you're not doing great by that. It's like, you know what? We were still champions, as opposed to you leading
right.
Oh, we're the champs.
Right,
it's
right,
so
right.
great. Then you're, that's not winning with dignity.
That's true. You're ripe for mockery, I think, if that happens. So.
Exactly.
All right. So the last one here, this is from Jen, who says, "Hey fellas, how many pairs of shoes do you own? What are your oldest, newest, and favorite pairs? Are you a sneakerhead, George?"
No,
But okay. I feel like maybe some people watching the Dubcast had a sneaking suspicion that you were a sneakerhead.
Why?
I don't know. I'm making that up. I'm pulling that
I wear like the same. I have like two or three hats that I wear in rotation on this show when I'm overdue for a haircut. And that's it. Like if I was really this, traveling fashionista, don't you think I would have a bigger hat rotation? I have like the same.
Check out my hat.
The first thing I do when I bring up the recording interface for this show is I look back at the last like 2 recordings and I say, okay, did I wear this same thing within the last 2 or 3 episodes? I just need to make this slight adjustment so that I don't get called out for wearing the same thing on every episode. Because if I could wear the same outfit on every episode, like a recurring television character, I'd probably try to get away with it if I could.
Right.
But that being said, I do have, I would say, in terms of like pairs of shoes I would say I have at least about a dozen pairs of shoes.
I think people end up with way more than they expect. Cause I was like, I don't care about shoes at all, but I just have all these like situational shoes, for various roles.
Yeah, half of them are situational. In terms of shoes that I regularly wear in my rotation, I would say probably 4 or 5, maybe.
I wear one pair of shoes. I wear the same pair of shoes every day, like to work. And it's just, they're a pair of Adidas.
I pretty much wear the same 2 or 3 pairs of shoes to work during the week.
But I have like a green pair of Skechers. I've got I've got a pair of shoes for mowing the grass. I got a pair of shoes for riding my bike. I got a pair of shoes for walking around when it's kind of muddy out. I got a pair of shoes for like, big snow boot kind of things.
I got some Tims when I was a freshman in college.
All right.
I needed to be walking through the snow in Columbus to get to class, and I've still got the same pair 12 years later.
There you go. Hell yeah.
So I that's the other thing too, is that I don't like I get a lot of mileage out of my stuff.
Right.
I still have the same backpack I used from when I was a freshman in high school. Through high school,
that's impressive.
All the way through college.
That's pretty impressive.
I got like a hiking backpack from REI,
mm-hmm.
and it's never broken on me or anything. I've used it literally over 15 years at this point. So I try to get a lot of mileage out of myself. I got a pair of shoes, I think, for Christmas, so that would be like my newest one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to a wedding. I think it was not quite last year, but in like towards the end of 2023, so like a year and a half ago, and I bought I went to Johnston and Murphy, and I got like 2 or 3 pairs of shoes while I was there, getting, in
All right.
preparation for that. So I've gotten a lot of mileage out of those too. And so, yeah, I've got fancier shoes for, going out occasions. And I'll tell you something else too. And this is what I'm really proud of. I got the best pair of running shoes that I've ever had. I got when I was a freshman in college, back when I was still like, you know, close to like 250 pounds. I wasn't 250 when I got to college. I was around there by the time I left.
Mm-hmm.
But I've mentioned before on my weight loss journey on this show that I lost 45 pounds when I was a freshman. So I got down to probably around like 185, 190
All right.
territory.
Nice.
But from the time that I was there to my worst to my best, I did it in the same pair of running shoes.
Cool.
And that might sound a little gnarly, but I promise that they've held up well, and they I'm not going to say they smell great, but they don't smell bad is my point. They've held up well enough that I've been able to use them for the last 12 years, and they're the best pair of running shoes I've ever had from Nike.
Yeah, I have a pair of hiking boots that I really like from Columbia, I think. Is that the name of the company? Isn't that
That's one of the outdoors.
Yeah. They're a
brands.
pair of Columbia like hiking boots, and I wear those whenever I'm like hiking or going out in the mud. And they're like waterproof. They're super comfortable. I've worn those. I've had the same pair of those for a long time, and they're kind of wearing out at this point. But like, I I just I like shoes that are reliable and work. You know what I mean? Like I know people will swear by certain brands and stuff, and I'm like, man, if you find the thing that you like that works for what you're trying to do, I hold on to that thing like grim death. You know what I mean? Like I like I have such brand loyalty to effective things that work. Um I don't really care that much about style or any of that crap, but if it's comfortable and it doesn't break down on me, I'm all about it.
Are
So
you above? I mean, I doubt you are based on what you just said. Were you above like will you wear Nike with Under Armour with Reebok, or are you one of
no,
the
I don't care.
purists?
I'll mix and that. Like I'm not that cool. If I thought I was that cool, I would. But like now, with that said, do I like a lot of sneakers? Like a lot of like Dunks and Air Force Ones and all that. Yeah, I think they're cool as hell. But I'm not. I'm not dropping $200 on a pair of shoes that it gets dirty and then they look like crap. Like I'm done with that. Like I've passed that point in my life. Now, with that said, if somebody finds a pair of the MF Doom Dunks and sends them to me, or a counterfeit pair and sends them to me, I
Oh,
will
you
be
know what?
forever in your debt.
I just remembered I bought a pair of Jordan slides in
Mhm.
2010
Yeah.
that I still use, even
Hell
though
yeah,
the
there you go.
logo has almost worn off of one of them.
Yeah, we're
I
both
don't. I
clearly
never
fashion
wear
palates.
them except when I need to, like, if you're gonna go out. Like, I don't. I live in an apartment. I don't get the paper delivered. But if I were to go do a chore that would be like the equivalent of like getting the paper out of your driveway or whatever,
Right.
that is like when I would wear them, or just like lounging around at the beach or whatever. Like I wouldn't wear them out for any reason, but I still do use those.
Nice.
Uh, and I've used them for like 15 years, just
All
to
right.
reinforce the point that I'll get the most out of anything.
There's nothing wrong with that.
So
I'm all about that. All right. So that's Ask Us Anything for this week. Thank you guys for sending those in. We'll keep answering them. A couple things I want to talk about before we get out of here. First of all, men's basketball. Bruce Thornton's back. Devin Royal's back. They got a center. Is this the renaissance of Ohio State men's basketball?
I don't know what's going on with Michigan.
No, I mean Michigan's dropping bags, and they're bringing in like what they had like 3 of the top 5 guys in the portal or something like that. They're bringing in. People are like, I've seen some reflexive stuff from Ohio State fans who are like, well, that can't be sustainable. I'm like, who cares? They don't care. They don't care if it's sustainable or not. It's kick ass. And again, like, could have gone hard after Dusty May. You probably could have gotten the dude. And I'm happy about Bruce Thornton coming back. I mean, I think that's cool. I think that's good. That's important. Devin Royal coming back is a big deal. He's very good. But you had to have those guys come back. You know what I mean? Like you didn't have a choice because otherwise your team was like nothing.
Honestly, after they got Mobley to agree to come back, I feel like it probably would have been in their best interest to let Thornton go.
Really?
I think that it's for the amount of money that they're supposedly paying both of those guys that play the same position.
Yeah, the return is not huge.
Yeah, and I know there's people that disagree with me about this, but I don't think that you get the most out of having like both of those guys unless you're playing them on the court at the same time for the amount of money that you're paying to retain them.
No, I know what you're saying.
And if you're playing both of them at the guard spots, I mean, Thornton's a good defender, but Mobley is small. He has to play the 1. Thornton then has to play the 2. And then you're probably forcing yourself into a position where you have to over rely on small ball lineups at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So get used to the idea of Sean Stewart playing center when he really should be playing the 3. Like, well, I feel like bringing both of those guys back and allocate, and I made this joke not on this show, but when we were talking about this in Slack, I feel like it's not in the best interest of any team to allocate 25% of their salary cap to 2 guys that play the same position. But maybe it'll work out for the Cincinnati Bengals.
It's not. It won't. Nothing ever works.
So what reason do we have to believe it'll work out for Ohio State basketball?
Well, so, Ohio State did get a center. Okay, they picked up Christoph Tilly, who is German, I think.
Sweet.
Yes. He's a German.
Yeah, WCC's second team.
Giddy up. Look,
nice.
12 and a half points a game. I do think it's really interesting that a guy who's 7 foot is getting like 5 rebounds.
How good is the center Michigan got?
Yeah, right. He's Shaquille O'Neal and Greg Oden combined.
And look, I'm sure for the people that want to move on from the May Diebler thing already, it's extremely annoying to keep hearing that, but
the comparisons invite themselves. Like it's very difficult not to do this because he's at your chief rival. Like that's the thing. If this were a situation where Dusty May was at like Purdue or Minnesota, I don't think it would be as prescient. It wouldn't be as something as urgent.
I think I feel like I'd still be bringing it up quite a bit.
Yeah, but Michigan increases that, I think.
And it's not only that, but it's also that how do you overlook the fact that Michigan was not going to hire Diebler if Ohio State hired Dusty?
Correct. Yeah. Yes.
So it's like, okay, we could go with this guy, but it's not like this guy is going to go to the other guy or the other school if we don't hire him. Yeah. Whereas this guy is probably going to go to the other school if we don't hire him. And he's one of, if not the best candidate for the job in the field right now.
Right.
And that's no longer in dispute. He won the Big Ten tournament after Michigan finished last place in the conference last year. And then he took them to the Sweet 16. And that was like, their 8th appearance in the Sweet 16 as a school since like 2013 or something. And that's on their 3rd different coach during that stretch. That is program stability.
Yeah.
Like it's one thing to have, like, they went from last in the conference last year to regaining stability. Like Ohio State is directly responsible for reinvigorating Michigan basketball. There's no other way to spin it.
I wouldn't go that far.
Every one of these moves that they get where they're getting Yaxel Davenport, whatever that guy from UAB's name is, that is hopefully going to the
Axl
NBA.
Rose.
I'm so mad about it relative to the center Ohio State got that I don't even know what the name of the guy Michigan got actually is. The point is, every single time that they make a move that is praised as positive, and to what you said earlier, they got like 3 of what some people consider to be the top 6 guys in the portal, including one guy that was in conference at Illinois. Mm-hmm. And the only thing they had to give up was Trey Donaldson, who was a guy that, even though I thought I was expecting Michigan fans to be more heartbroken about losing Donaldson than they actually seem to be. Like, that's what really surprised me more
Well,
than
because I
anything
think
else
they
out of
knew that
all of this.
they had the opportunity to make that up, and they had the confidence that it was going to happen. And that's the
But
thing.
I felt like looking from afar, I would have guessed he was probably their best player this year. Not that wasn't Golden or Wolf,
Mhm.
and so it would have hurt a lot for them to lose a guy like that.
Right.
And they weren't very heartbroken about losing him at all. That's
Well,
what surprised me more than anything.
right, and that's kind of what I'm saying though, because like if this is Ohio State and you lose a player of that caliber, you're like, oh crap, like this is the end. But they don't feel that way now because of who they have, who they know they can get, and who their coach is, and that changes the whole dynamic of everything. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. There's still time for Diebler. I'm not calling for his job or anything like that.
He's going to have
But
to find a lot of diamonds in the rough with the
right,
resources that they
correct,
have
and
left.
that's really what it boils down to.
And
Exactly
that's
right.
easier said than done.
It
I'm not
is.
saying he can't do it. I'm just saying it is a difficult thing for any coach to do, to get more out of less, especially when your back is presumably up against the wall the way that you would think his kind of is in what
Mhm.
feels like a do or die year for Ohio State basketball.
Yeah, I
The
don't
margin
disagree.
for error here is very, very slim.
Yep. Okay, so last thing, speaking of men's basketball, we've got our final set. Who do you got between Houston and Florida?
Oh, Florida. I think
Okay.
Houston beating Duke was a total fluke.
I mean, I think that's the way Duke felt because they had that thing locked up
I heard they
until
got I heard they got kind of screwed at the end of the game with like an over the back call that should have been like a play on or something that
yeah,
let Houston make the go ahead free throws. I mean,
kinda.
Flag still totally choked. And the
Yeah, he did.
interesting thing is I saw a super cut in like all of Duke's losses this year. Shire drew up like an absolutely terrible play at the end of the game for all of them.
Oh,
So
it was
it's
chaos. Yeah, it didn't seem like they knew what they were doing at the end of the game.
no, they just needed Flag to play hero ball, and the
Exactly.
guy couldn't deliver, unfortunately. So
Right.
it was a choke job. I mean, credit to Houston. Again, I said it last week. I underestimated them. I thought they were going to be the most likely one seed out of the bunch to lose before the Final Four.
Hmm.
But I had Florida playing Duke in the title game and Duke beating them. If Duke isn't there, I think Florida has been the deepest team in the country pretty much all season.
I would
I would
agree.
expect them to get the win.
I don't love Florida winning that. I wouldn't be super happy about it. Residual anger, I guess, from 2007.
I guess I would be happier to see Houston win on the sheer basis that the SEC doesn't get a championship to brag
oh yeah,
about.
no. I mean, that's for me. That's priority number one. I mean, they took it to the chin hard in bowl season, and I would love to see that continue here at the national championship game. But I'm with you. I think Florida's going to win. So we'll see how it plays out. But we'll be back here next week to talk about all of that. And of course, all of the things that we saw at the spring game and more. But until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.